Hey folks, welcome back after a short delay in this last tutorial part. Managing multiple jobs and all that. I have to slow down a little bit on the blogging. But anyways, this is the last part of our CSS tutorial. Um, I called it housekeeping because it's basically miscellaneous items that I think are important when you're doing websites. You're modifying some of the attributes and elements and all that stuff. But on the other hand, they don't actually fit in a specific category. They're not like colors or something like that. So uh, this tutorial, I'm basically going to cover things like display, position, overflows, combinations, pseudo, um, counters, a little bit more on units, some functions. I have a little typo there is functions, multi-columns, and we'll end up with grids. I hope you enjoy this video. It's a little long. It's got a lot of material in it, and I apologize for that. But this will be the last thing that we on CSS. After this, I encourage you to do more online searching if you want other things. And then we're ready for PHP. That's coming up after this. So let's get to it. Let's get to see all of my examples on this housekeeping items that I'm mentioning here. All right, folks. So here we are. This is a pretty lengthy tutorial. In the last one, I took the liberty, as always, to preloading all of the source files, and you can see the list here. It's all in brackets. Each one I named it for what the sample it is. Some have more than one example, and there is also a CSS file here somewhere. There it is, counter CSS. So I preloaded them, and I preloaded them in Microsoft Edge over here so you can see the outcome. And I'll explain what each one is doing and how it's working. It's a big tutorial part. So let's start with the first one, which is the display property. The display property is basically used to define how things will work on the screen. And this is the file. You can see I have my display right here. The style for I'm making my for my paragraphs, I'm making the color blue. Text color for all paragraph elements, and I put in here. And these are the three types of displays that we have. We have none, inline, or block. And each one, obviously, if there's none, obviously displays nothing. Inline is along the lines, and then in block, right? So I made my first header style color red, align the centers, display property. That's this right here, is this right here. Then I'm doing display none. This is, again, just a header. I'm just stating what's going to happen. And I'm using the lorem ipsum dollar sit amit. This is a, what do you call this? Latin, just general words, right? So I'm doing class none. This is the first. So display will be none. Hello world. So I'm putting a paragraph right here saying the words hello world, but the class is none. So as you can see, I never see that in here. In fact, right about there, right there, is where the word hello world should be, but I'm making display none. So that's what the none does. It basically makes it non-visible. Make no mistake about this. It's there. You just can't see it. Okay. So a lot of people think, oh, it's like, why even put it in there if it's not? Well, sometimes when you're doing development, when you're trying to see how things work, you may use this class. You may have it in the background there. Just put class none, and it automatically hides what you have in there. It's only for, for debugging, if you will. I don't even know if that applies to this, but that's what it's for. The second one is the inline. Now, the three paragraphs are identical, by the way. They're identical. The only thing that's different is this here. This is inline, And look what it does. It puts it in line with the rest, and it's in blue. It's in blue. Why? Because it's this right there, paragraph blue. The third one, this is the most strange of all. I call it the strange. It's the block. You can tell it says class block, but what happens is it puts a line break before and after the element that has that type of property. So if it's block, it automatically puts a line right here and a line right there, and then it continues with the paragraph. Now, first thing you may be asking yourself is, why would I have either one of these? Well, like any other element in CSS, the options are there. You use them to the best of your abilities, whether it's by knowledge or by copying from somewhere else or modifying from anyone, which is obviously okay in this world of programming. I'm okay with that. But you know, with certain limitations. I've got to retract of that a little bit. But anyways, when it comes to tutorials and things like that on the internet, I'm okay with people copying things because that's how you learn. You know, I'm not talking trade secrets here or or operating system level techniques used by these big companies. No, no, no. I'm talking, you know, things like web pages and so on, and even basic programming and, you know, C programming, whatever. So it's on the internet from tutorials. Obviously, it's you're okay to use the examples of not just mine, but thousands of programmers out there. They have very good a very good hand on how to do things. So with that said, the block puts a line before and after. The end line puts it along with that, and the none, you don't see it. It's there, you just don't see it. Okay, that is a display example. I don't want to, not going to venture too much into it because those are three things to do. How you use them and all that, it's up really up to you. So I'm going to be closing these windows as I'm going over here. Actually, I'm not going to close. I'm just going to the next one. I'm going to go to positions and I'll click on the next example. And here you can see the different positions that we have. What I've done here, here's my title of positions. Remember, we've seen we have an asterisk, means for everything. So border box for the whole thing throughout. And then we have displaying inline block. It's a little, is inline block is a combination of both inline and block. It was not in the previous example of display, but you can do a combination of them this way. And I have my width and height, background blue, color yellow. And these settings that I have here, this is for relative right here. All of this is for my relative example. And here is relative, H3, relative position. And I got my div, the classes box. I got 1. Here's my ID for relative, 2, 3, and 4. You can tell that 2 is off from 1, 3, and 4. See, box 2 is off. That's because I'm telling it to move 20 pixels from the top and 20 from the left. Okay, and obviously the color is red. So this is a red and it's relative. So from right here, from this position, you're offsetting 20 and 20. That's how relative works. You tell it relative from, and it could be, by the way, from right or from bottom. Okay, this example just has it from the left and the top. So from where the position would normally be, take it off 20 pixels from the left and 20 from the top. That's a relative. What is absolute? Here's my absolute right here. In my absolute, I'm doing 175 pixels and 100 pixels here from the top and from the left. This is my absolute. Now, I want you to see something here. Well, actually, I could probably do this here. Notice how I move my page up and down like so. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger now. See how everything moves? This part right here says this paragraph is located at 50 and 50. It's not really 50 and 50. I don't know why I put that in there, but it's not. It's actually 175 and 100. And it is from the top of the document going down and from the right. So you can see this is bigger here and here. And it's not 50-50. I'm going to change that. Well, no, I'm going to leave it like that, but it's actually 175 and 100. Change that to 100. And I'm going to save it and refresh it. And now it says, 175 and 100. There's 100 pixels right here, and it's 175 right here. And it's absolute. That means that is this block, it's from the absolute, from the 0, 0, from right there to right there. This one, the relative, was from the position that it was supposed to be. It's relative. Then we have what's called a fix. Notice how when I move, see how I'm moving the screen up and down on the browser, but the text in red, this right here, doesn't move. It doesn't move at all. See that? That is a fixed. See, it's fixed. It's 300 from the top, 45 from the left. So there's 45 here, 300 over here. And no matter what I do, and I'm gonna go ahead and do this. See, I can scroll up and down, but to see the red right here doesn't move. Doesn't move at all because it is fixed. It's on a specific location and it will not move. And I threw off the Z index. It's not really part of the position name, but I felt it was important because in if you ever taken math, there's an X and a Y, but there's also a Z. A Z is the third dimension. And in this case, there's a Z index. If you've ever done any work with layers, whether it's a PowerPoint or Word or you're doing drawings in any drafting program out there, you probably have seen or heard the word layers. And Z index is that. It uses the Z index in this case too. Width is 40%, background green. So you see this block right here, green? That is the Z index. It basically tells it to be on top or behind a specific box. So we have a wrapper, which is nothing more than a relative position. It's right there. That's my wrapper. It's just a box. And then we have my Z index 1, 3, and 2. This here defines the position of these boxes. If the boxes are not on top of each other, if they're one next to each other, it probably wouldn't matter. But Z index is used to overlap items. That's the most common thing to do is overlapping items, not text. I'm actually talking about elements. And so that's what the positions do. Let's go to the overflow. There we go. Go to overflow. I'm gonna resize this here. All 4 paragraphs are the same. The only thing that changes is the if it's visible, hidden, scroll, or automatic. And I have a box. My box is there's a 15 EMs by 5 EMs. So the all 5 boxes are the same. And I'm putting the type of overflow there is. When you have an overflow, what you're basically telling CSS is what should I do? By default, it's automatic, by the way. The default is automatic. But what should do? If I force it to be visible, see, this is my square. But I can see the text going down. That is a visible overflow. It's overflowing. It's bigger than the box. It's bigger than the element, but I'm letting it see it. The second one is hidden. Now, as you can see, it doesn't fit. It's the same paragraph. I'm using the same paragraph, but now I can't see it. It's invisible. It cuts it right there, and I can see the top right there, the little top of the letters of that next line, which are these, but I can't see it. So when you have an overflow of hidden, it cuts it. On visible, it lets it continue. How about a scroll? Look at that. I can use the scroll. It puts an automatic. There's not one there, but when I hover the mouse over, if I move it down, up and down, there's a scrolling. That's overflow scroll. And then there's the automatic. The automatics is the default. It puts, in this case, a scroll. It takes, and I'm actually saying it a little bit wrong. I will admit to that. Actually, it takes it to whatever the parent element has it. If the parent element has it hidden, this will be, inherit that type of overflow. So these are the 4 types: visible, invisible, scroll, or automatic. Now we go to combinations. Combinations, and boy, do we have combinations examples. What I've done here, I put in a line, a horizontal line between each of the combinations, and I've shown 4 combinations. There's the descendant combination, the child selector, the adjacent sibling, and the general sibling. And each one, if you can see, div is an element, as we know. So when I use the div here, something happens. In this case, div 1, because I'm not using div, I'm using div 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, why am I doing that? Because I wanted each one to show on my page. I don't want instead of doing some specific classes, I'm just saying, no, look, we'll just use different divs. On a paragraph in div, I'm making it yellow, background blue. That's this right here. This text is affected by the descendant combination right there. I'm telling it, look, for the descendant, and I'm gonna hit enter here only so that you can see the different ones. So I'm saying, look, for the descendant, you're gonna do a yellow in the background and text yellow and background is blue. So when I have a div and I have a paragraph inside of my div, that's what I see. That's what I see. This one is not affected. See, paragraph right there, it's not affected. Why? Because the P is outside of the div. So this is a straight out paragraph. This one's a paragraph inside of the div. It's like a child. So when it's div and the P inside of the div, then you do this. So this is the result. The child selector, we put the greater than right there. And you can see it's a color white, background red, this right here. This text affected by the descendant, this one is as well. This one is not, this one is not, and that one is not. So let's go over here. And it starts right there. And I'm gonna do this and this. I'm only gonna do that so you can see what I'm talking about. Here is the child selector all the way to the horizontal right. The paragraph is not modified. Okay, it's the same paragraph. This text is affected by this in the combination. Why? Because it's inside of the div. Remember, inside of the div, it affects the div. So this one is affected. This is a section. So a section is not part of the paragraph, therefore is not affected. And then we put another paragraph inside of the div, and this one is as well. So we get out of the div, and this one is not affected, and that's this line right here. So you can see how in the child selector, only the items that are both div and P inside of the div are affected, but anything else is not. That's what they call the child selector. Now we have the adjacent sibling selector. Instead of a greater than, we put a plus. And you can see that the only one affected is this one right here. This one is just after my div. See it right there. So let's go over here. The paragraph obviously is outside of div, it's not going to affect it. That's another P, is not affected. I'm not even in the div, so it wouldn't matter. I have the div and I have a P, but it's not affected. Why not? This one is the only one that's affected, but this one is not. So the adjacent means do the one after. That plus means after the div 3. So when I have my div 3, this is the only one that's going to be, which is this one. That's the adjacent. And then we have the general sibling. We use the little tilde right there. You see the little tilde, and we'll do that. So how does that work? Well, here's my general sibling, selecting all elements that are next to siblings of D4. This one's not affected. This one's not affected. This one is next to D4. Code should not be affected, but then this one is again, right? So outside of the div, all the P's before I get into something else. That's why this one and this one are affected. It's not confusing, but it sometimes you got, you got to get used to it to say it nicely. You got to get used to these different selectors. Anyways, that's my combinations example. The code's on the screen so you can see how it works. And so now let's go to pseudo. And there's you've probably seen pseudo classes and pseudo elements, and you're like, what do they do? Pseudo is nothing more than doing a temporary change on something. Okay, look at this example. I'm saying A, and the pseudo is a little colon. That's how you do the pseudo. It's a little colon right there. That's the little colon, and we have the links, visited, hover, active, and these are the different colors that it will do, and then we have a div hover and h hover, and Pete, and this is my paragraph 2 in this case, and I have a site. You can see all of these things that I'm modifying. And then I have my example. So what does this do? Here's my CNN. There's CNN right there. See how that changed to a capital CNN? See how that changed automatically to big? And look at this text. This goes to blue. Look at that. That's a tip. When the mouse hovers over this, that's the tip. Over that, changes the color. Over this, changes to CNN. So what's happening? Okay, let's start with the bottom one. To hover over a tip, side hover, paragraph 2, display block. So when I do this, paragraph 2 doesn't show unless I hover over. Yippee. That's how you do a tooltip. The second one, you can see it changes color when I'm hovering over. That's this. It changing it to red, P2, blue. I'm sorry, it's this one. This one hover. The hover the mouse in this one and color, and that's my div. My div hover, and that's the column. See, that's what pseudo does. It changes it for that one particular thing. Here's my blue, and the one at the top is all of these. Actually, it's a combination of all these because I'm changing color, size, and look at this font size to 35 pixels and whatever. I'm doing that with CNN right there. So not too much explaining on this one, but basically, if you get something off of this, a little colon means pseudo class, and you can modify one particular element while something's happening. In this case, the mouse going over, or you have visited. I'm not going to click on the CNN, but if I did, it changed the color of a visited a link. And so, yeah, that's what this does. What about pseudo elements? I'm going to click on pseudo elements. Go to the next example. So pseudo elements use double colons. See the two double colons? On the class, it was one. On the double, this is the elements. So this is usually in combination with befores and afters and so on. Because look at the example of A before behavior. Here I have the A. See the H3? A heart is, change that to placed before the text of this paragraph. I'm going to save that. I'm going to refresh that. So there it is. And you see the little heart? I'm telling you here, hey, when you have an H3 before, put a little heart. The content, change it, put a heart and before. So it puts a little heart and then it does this. On the divs, here are my divs, there's the before and after. The after is dark red, but now I'm going to change it with the pseudo element right here, and I'm going to put a happy face. So here's my red, and here's my happy face. To do the drop cap, first letter, font size 25 pixels, color red. There it is. There's the drop cap right there. And that's for the marker blue, font size 25 fixed only lists. Okay, I think I skipped one. I skipped one. Anyways, so right here, when I have my an order list and then I have an order list right there, I actually made some changes to it. You notice how I have 3 dots. Here I got 1, 2, 3, but I'm making them bigger. I'm making them bigger. When I do the first line, it affects only on the list, and it only does the first one. So here's the text transform to uppercase and color blue and 18px. So it's these right here. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong example. That's this right here. Lauren Ibsen $CMET. This is my one paragraph. This is the other one, and that one only affects the first line right there, uppercase, text transform, uppercase. So it's this right there. Of course, I gotta call it right here because I'm doing the ID equals different too, right? This is a regular paragraph. This is a paragraph with different two. I'm telling it in the first line to do uppercase and transform, and that's what this is. All right. Let's go to counters. And boy, I got 3 examples of counters. That's the first one. In part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I just got I put some arbitrary names there. How does this work? Here's the color red, text line for center. That's that. You notice how I got H3, 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 and so on. But yet over here it says part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and so on. How does that work? Well, first of all, you have to declare a variable. And you do that by doing the counter reset part number. It could be any part NO is my variable. It's a variable and it's reset to 0. Okay. You have to use it. You have to do the reset before anything happens. Then I'm using a pseudo element right here. Before I actually, when I do the H3, before that, I'm going to increment part number. That's my variable that was defined over here. I'm going to increment it. And then the content is going to be part number plus counter is a function that gives me the number of part number and then the colon. So this here says, hey, part number 1 colon C++ tutorial. If I want to here put in a dash, save it. Boom, there it is. Okay, so I declare my variable, counter reset, then I increment it, and then I change the content, including the function counter, which gives me the value of part number. So every time I encounter this element, H3, it automatically does all of that. So anyways, counters 2, another example of counters. Now I got nested counters. Well, no big deal. We have a level 1 and a level 2. Remember, we got to do this at what particular level in the body. I could do it in the body level 1 and level 2, but in this case, I'm going to do it with the H2 element. And then I'm going to increment my level 1, my level 1s. Then I'm going to do for H3, I'm going to do a little padding on the left. You remember what padding does, it moves things to the right. And then I'm going to do an increment of level 2. This is just a nesting. That's all it is. And here I got to do is put my H1s, H2s, and H3s. See, I'm not putting anything else. That's what the result does. Section 1, that's this section plus the level 1. And then for the H3s, it does 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 1, and so on and so forth. Every H2 will change the section number. Every H3 will increment the item number. Pretty cool, right? So that's what this is. Yet one more example of counters. Counters 3. Same thing, kind of like same thing, except that this case, I'm using a style sheet, which is called counter CSS. And I'm going to go ahead and go to counter CSS. I got it here somewhere. Oh, it's the next one. And all I'm doing is separating into a separate file. I'll put my same thing, counter level 1, centering some counter level 2. Is the same example as the previous example. It's nested. Okay, it's nothing new. I'm calling it section plus the variable level counter my function to get the value of counter level 1, counter level 1 dot counter level 2. That's what says 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. So let's go back to the example here. All I gotta do is put the classes, and it automatically does all of the incrementing of that. Now in counter classes, because I'm doing this right here. Control I, and then here's control 0, right? Control 0, control I. And then over here is my control I and my control 0. So my control I's is the section numbers. My control 0 is the subsection numbers. So there it is. That's the outcome. Here, this item will not increment the counter because I'm not using a control 0. See, there's no control 0 here, so it's not going to show. So it's going to jump from there to this. So that's what this is right here. And here's the counter CSS. You can see it. Been on the screen for a while. Let's go to symbols. And I got 2 examples on symbols. You see this little red apple, green apple, red apple, green apple, red apple. Okay. I actually researched this from someone else, and I admit to it. It's called symbols. And this is how it works. You do a counter style, and this is called red and green. You do a cyclic system. These 2 symbols are the ones for the apples, the red one and the green one. And there's a space, okay? So when you do the li, and this is, by the way, only for the list style. So the list style type is red and green, which is this. I'm basically defining my own list style. And I'm telling, look, use only these 2 characters, this right here. And then when I list them, it does these. Symbols 2, which I'm going to show you now, is identically the same, except I'm doing, look, it's the same. I'm not doing anything. I'm calling my flags, and I'm putting 5 different flags. 5 flags. So when I got list options 1 through 5, it'll show the flags that I listed. If I had more items than flags, it would just repeat themselves. Okay. So I'm leaving the code on the screen with the outcome. So that's how you do if you ever want to see do custom lists and stuff like that. And I know I covered list in another section of this tutorial, but this is just another enhancing of that. I wanted to cover a little bit on units. And there's my units. Because units are, they're so controversial. There's so many things. I mean, you've probably seen, if you're new to CSS, especially if you're new to CSS, you see a lot of the word PXs and EMs and percentages and VWs, and you're like, why do they use this instead of that? And what? Well, we have absolute and we have relative units, and they can be used for distances or for calculations. So it really depends on what you need it for, is what you want to do. On a regular web page, you probably use pixels. Normally, that you would use pixels, but sometimes you got to use percentages, and sometimes you got to use VWs, which is, by the way, the viewport. That's the viewport units. So look at this. For box, I have a border 3 pixels, solid dark red, padding 10 pixels, 1 EM 0. That's just the box. And then I have for W 1 EM, 4 pixels for viewports, and for EMs. Okay, so I'm using the same box and I'm combining them. Remember when I do two classes separated by space, I'm using both. So look at the examples here. I am 100 pixels wide. I'm 5 viewports wide, and I'm 10 EM wide. If I resize this, notice how the middle box changes. Why is that? I'll tell you right now. I'm using viewport units, and viewport units are based on the viewport, the size of your screen. So it changes. It's a relative value. Okay. While the other ones, pixels and EMs, are fixed. One's the number of pixels, the other one's a number of based on the font size, right? So the font will determine the size of the box. Now let's use percentages. Let's go to the next example here. See how this box goes to the end, and this one is only this size. Look what happens. They both resize, but very consistently the same way. That's because here I have my table. It's a table with a border too, but the table's width is 50%. This one, on the other hand, is a paragraph. This is a normal view. I'm not giving this one anything, so it's automatically going to do 100%. But no matter what size my window is, that table is always going to be half the size because I'm telling it to be 50% right there. So that's gives you an idea of how units work. Yeah, you can use percentages, or you can use specific units. And I strongly suggest you read the material on the WordPress that I got, and in there I go over each one of the units more in detail in writing. All right, functions. You have already used a lot of functions here. Every time you use an RGB, RGBA, SVG, and all that, those are functions. We know that, right? I mean, we award HSL, HSLA, they're functions. But there are other functions. CSS, even though it's not a programming language per se, it does have the ability to return values. We saw the function counter. It gives me the value of a variable in units when it's using the counters. So we have functions here as well. Here I got my main, and this is what it's called. This is my function, radial gradient, and I'm using green, yellow, and blue. And see, if I put the cursor on top, it shows me what it's going to look like. And I could do inside each one of the values. I can use X decimal values and all that. This here, and here's my logo and the description. The description is basically a CSS example radial gradient function, which is this text. My logo name, I can put whatever I want here. I'll put my name. And when I refresh, boom, it changes my name. What happens if I resize the box? See, that's what happens. Exactly. That's exactly what you thought it would happen. It would happen. There we go. Now, it's a little bit of playing with the numbers. It's not automatically. Number one thing you got to consider is the height. You have a height and a width. Based on these two numbers, the font size and what in the your background image, and if it's a background image, I'm using a radial gradient. But I have a font size of 35 in bold. What happens if I make this 55? And I'm going to show you what it does. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to refresh it. See how I made it bigger? I'm still kind of centered, but if I make it too big, it's going to throw it off. It's going to throw it off big time. So when playing with gradients, make sure you literally experiment a little bit. Just go over the numbers that you see and like, oh, this is going to work. If the paragraph is too big, if it's more than one line, if maybe you want two lines, maybe you want this one to be a different color and a little bit centered. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Nothing wrong with that. I'm going to put here color red and save it. And then when I'll refresh it, boom, makes it red. There we go. A little more functions. I'll go to the next one here. This is very similar. If you look at it, very similar. The only difference is I'm using for my background image, linear gradient. And here's what that looks like. It shows you right there. Blue, white, and red, like our flag. And the United States. I'm in the United States, guys. So anyways, you can play with the linear gradient again. You gotta be careful with this padding and the font sizes and all that. I was playing with the size of the padding because remember that's the spacing on the top and the font size. Otherwise, your name can be off. You know, if I do 75, I'm gonna save it, and then I go over here and refresh. Boom, it moves it down. See, so you got to really be careful with all that. I'm gonna change this to 100 so you can see what that costs, and I'm gonna refresh it, and boom, now I made the text go down and the box gets smaller. So this is one of the, again, like the gradients, any other gradients that are out there. You got to really play with the numbers until you get it exactly where you want it. It's kind of cool to do like a little logo kind of thing, not too complicated, but I thought it was cool. Functions, the min max function. Yeah, believe it or not, CSS has minimums and maximums functions. And look at this, the max and the min. Here I'm telling it to do red, the other one is going to be blue. So we obviously have our max and our min. The height is 150 pixels, but this is how the function works. I'm doing max of 80% or 400 pixels. So if it's too small, see, you see how the box resizes? It's always at 80%, unless it's too small, then I make it 400 pixels. So the way max works is, look, do a percentage, but you got to do the maximum of these two. I got to guarantee that I have at least this size. The minimum is the same thing. You know, do the minimum unless you have at least that much, right? You can see that. So I'm basically saying whatever's the maximum of these two is the width, and wherever's the minimum of these two, that's the width. I found that useful when calculating how the screen is going to look between a computer versus an iPad or a phone. So that's giving you a hint of how you use this. Again, I'm only giving you the tools. You determine how you want to use them. Repeating functions, repeating linear gradient, radial gradient, conic gradient. I'm not gonna go too much over this one. It's just repeating the same over and over and over. I'm not gonna explain this one too much. I've seen this in multiple examples out there. I don't use it myself. I'm not a fan of repeating items because when you do it in small devices, it doesn't look good. But it's definitely something you can do. What you can use, however, is the end child, which is also a function. Now, this is a cool example. This is the end child, and I'm saying, look, my H2, my header 2, make it red, align center. There it is, list example. I'm gonna do order list. I'm gonna put the planets. Earth is the third one. So I'm saying, look, what does the little two dots means? Pseudo, I got it over here. Pseudo class, right? Pseudo class, right? So the end child means whatever numbers in here is only going to affect that item. And I'm going to do it for the 3. This is my pseudo child. This is my pseudo element before. So first of all, for the child, I'm going to change it to blue and bolder. That's this. Then for the before, I'm going to put that little planet that I found in my little icons, and I put the planet in there. That's how that works. I can do an end child for each one of the planets and put a color, and or I can just do the before for each one through whatever, and you know it will work. Let's say I'm gonna do for the second and first instead of planets. However, I'm gonna do something else. I'm gonna do that one. And for this one, I'm gonna do that one. Yeah, let's do Saturn. Sure. I know Saturn doesn't look like that, but Venus doesn't look like that, the Saturn, but that's okay. And boom, there they are. So again, it only affects list in this case, but the nth child is very useful because In this case, I'm using n child in the number. I could do n child even or odds, and it only affects the evens or the odds. Okay, so it's pretty awesome. I'm almost done with all this. Let's go to columns. Columns is very straightforward. Here's my columns. You can see that I got 3 columns and I got 4 columns examples. And then this ones are the number of columns. It's very basic. You define the number of columns, the number of pixels, the number of columns, 50 pixels, 3 columns, and the width. And you divide it, in this case I have 3, so I'm dividing 100% of the width divided by 3 or divided by 4. And the number of pixels between the columns, okay, that's what this is. And I'm just put it in there and boom. If I make it big, if I make it small, there it is. That's how columns work. Not too much to explain in this one. Now we get to final, we're on the final row here. There's 2 examples for grids. That's the first one. Basically, that's my grids. Grids are basically a way to define sections of a screen. But to do that, you have to make the display of type grid. I know I mentioned inline and block and none, but you can make a grid as well. When you do that, then you define your columns. In this case, we have 3. So I got auto, auto, auto. And you make it light blue. This is the light blue. This is the usually right here. 10 pixels, that's the width right there. And my grid item, make it light green, each one of these. And then I'm doing, that's the lines that I'm doing around it. And I'm just displaying them over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there they are, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Another grid layout here is the same thing, except I'm giving it names. Header, menu, main, right, footer. You can call it, A through Z for all we care. And then you have a name for each one. What this helps you with is when you're doing a design, you can design a flyer, and then it's like a template, and then you can just add items to that part of the flyer. My last example, grids 2. I thought I had 2 different examples, but apparently it's the same example on both of them. Well, I am missing. Nope, I'm not missing. For some reason, I'm not opening the other file, but I'll open it right now. Here, what I have is different from the other one is the grid column and grid column start, grid row start, and grid row end. This is a span. It's basically a span, okay? And I'm gonna show you that. I don't need to show all that, but there it is. Here I'm spanning 2 columns. That's why we have it from 1 to 3. And I'll explain why it says 3, but it's only 2 here. It's actually the number of lines. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So from 1 to 3, put them together. That's what this is right here. From 1 to 3, the number of lines. 1, 2, 3. On the second example on the bottom is from 1 to 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So one span. And that's how you can span. They're not called spans. You just aligning them with the grid row or the column, grid column or grid row, start to end. And remember, you're doing it not by number of blocks, but by number of lines. That's the one key thing you gotta remember. From 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So there you have it. I know this has been a very long tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. And it'll be a week or 2 before I get started on the PHP. So I'm doing some classes right now as we speak. But anyways, if you like this, I hope you click like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll be seeing you soon. So there you go. Thank you very much, and you know what to do.